Hello again from us here at Nicopure Labs. I'm Patricia Kovacevic, the General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer, and today we will talk about product standards for newly deemed products under the Tobacco Control Act, as such standards might become applicable to newly deemed products in the future when such standards will be promulgated by the Food and Drug Administration. First, we will talk about the Food and Drug Administration's authority under Section 907 of the Tobacco Control Act to promulgate product standards. Then, we can take a look at what types of standards might FDA promulgate and how long might it take FDA to do so. Last, but not least, we can discuss about other types of standards that are not under the purview of the FDA and some initiatives that Nicopure Labs is taking an active role in. Just to recap, the Tobacco Control Act is a statute enacted by Congress in 2009. Since May 10, 2016, FDA has issued its deeming rule, which came into effect on August 8, 2016, and which brings a large number of new nicotine-containing products under the Tobacco Control Act. The deeming rule did not contain any product standards for the newly deemed products. Thus, any product standards to be issued in the future by the Food and Drug Administration will have to be issued under the authority conferred by the Tobacco Control Act. In particular, Section 907, entitled Tobacco Product Standards, spells out the manner in which FDA may issue product standards. Let me immediately try to dispel any anxiety, and let me emphasize again, at present there are no FDA product standards applicable to vaping products under the Tobacco Control Act or the deeming rule. However, you may hear manufacturers such as ourselves at Nicopure Labs saying that we manufacture our products to the highest quality standards. That is normal because we do have our own internal quality standards that we believe are extremely rigorous. And that is a true statement. We truly do manufacture our products at the highest quality standards. When we talk about the legal terminology, though, product standards under the Tobacco Control Act has a very precise meaning, and FDA would have to engage in rulemaking to issue such standards. So, Section 907A3 of the Tobacco Control Act provides that FDA may adopt tobacco product standards if FDA finds that a tobacco product standard is appropriate for the protection of public health. Note that in the text of the law, when you read it, the FDA is technically referred to as the Secretary, which really means the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. So, how will FDA adopt a new product standard? FDA shall publish in the Federal Register a notice of the proposed rulemaking for the establishment, amendment, or revocation of any tobacco product standard. A notice of the proposed rulemaking has to be issued, and it also has to set forth a finding with supporting justification that the tobacco product standard is appropriate for the protection of public health. The notice that will be published in the Federal Register must invite interested persons to submit a draft or proposed tobacco product standard for consideration by FDA. It will invite interested persons to submit comments on structuring the standards so that such standard does not advantage foreign-grown tobacco over domestically grown tobacco. And also, it must invite the Secretary of Agriculture to provide any information or analysis which the Secretary of Agriculture believes is relevant to the proposed tobacco product standard. According to the Tobacco Control Act, the comment period to such proposed product standard rule shall be at least 60 days. As we know, FDA will then take some time, possibly well over a year or more, to review all of the comments that interested parties will have submitted to the docket for the proposed product standard. Therefore, it may take quite a while between the time a proposed rule is published in the Federal Register and the time a final rule will actually promulgate a product standard that becomes effective. Also, FDA may refer the proposed regulation on product standards to the Tobacco Product Scientific Advisory Committee, which shall issue a report on the matter within 60 days from referral. So, what are some examples of product standards that FDA might impose? FDA may impose a reduction for nicotine yields of the products. However, the Tobacco Control Act prohibits FDA from mandating the reduction of nicotine to 0. Then, a product standard may mandate the reduction or elimination of other constituents, including smoke constituents, or harmful components of the product. The product standard may request provisions respecting the construction, components, ingredients, additives, constituents, and other properties of the tobacco product. So FDA basically can require certain specifications of the product. Also, a product standard might include provisions for the testing on a sample basis, if necessary, or on an individual basis of the tobacco product. Also, it might provide for measurement of the tobacco product characteristics of the respective tobacco product. Also, a product standard may require that the results of certain of the tests of the tobacco product demonstrate that the product is in conformity with the portion of the standard for which the respective tests are required. Finally, but again, this is not an exhaustive list, FDA might require that the sale and distribution of the tobacco product be restricted, but only to the extent that the sale and distribution of tobacco product can be restricted under a regulation under Section 906D, which is another section, of course, of the Tobacco Control Act. FDA can also, through a product standard, require the use and prescribe the form and content for the proper use of the the form and content of labeling for the proper use of the tobacco product. Also, tobacco product containing foreign-grown tobacco may be required to meet the same standards applicable to tobacco products containing domestically grown tobacco. As you see, FDA really has very broad discretion in issuing product standards. However, let me emphasize again, for newly deemed products at present, FDA has no product standards. Well, what else must FDA take into consideration when issuing a product standard? According to the Tobacco Control Act, FDA must take into consideration information submitted in connection with the proposed standard by interested parties, of course, usually the industry, regarding the technical achievability of compliance with such standard. So in other words, FDA really cannot ignore if the standard they want to propose is really not feasible and if it would put all of the industry out of business. FDA really must take into consideration whether manufacturers can actually comply with such standard. FDA shall also take into consideration all other information submitted in connection with the proposed standard, including information concerning the countervailing effect of the tobacco product standard on the health of adolescent tobacco users, adult tobacco users, or non-tobacco users, such as, for instance, the creation of a significant demand for contraband or other tobacco products that do not meet the legal requirements. FDA really has to look into whether creating a product standard thus creates a black market. So FDA cannot ignore the realities of the marketplace. For example, if FDA were to ban menthol, the reality of the fact is that most people will turn to the black market to continue their preferred type of product. And FDA really has to take that into consideration because, as we know, black market products are completely unregulated products, and it surely cannot be good for public health if consumers stopped using legal products in favor of illegal products, just because FDA came up with a product standard that is too onerous to comply with. FDA, of course, is a science-based organization, and therefore it has to consider scientific evidence concerning the risks and benefits to the population as a whole, the increased or decreased likelihood that existing users of tobacco products will stop using such products, and the increased or decreased likelihood that those who do not use tobacco products will start using such products. Clearly, when FDA makes a standard, that standard is likely to make the products less appealing. So the chances that somebody who doesn't use the product would start using the products arguably might go down. But all of this is evidence, scientific evidence that FDA must consider. Also, if FDA makes a standard on reduction or even elimination of an additive, constituent, or component, because FDA has found that the additive, constituent, or component is or may be harmful, any party, including a manufacturer or a scientist, objecting to the proposing standard on the ground that the proposed standard will not reduce or eliminate the risk of illness or injury, may provide for FDA's consideration scientific evidence that demonstrate that the proposed standard will not reduce or eliminate the risk of illness or injury. In other words, if FDA, in its view, believes taking out an additive, a kind of flavoring, for instance, would be beneficial for public health, but it is really not clear, there is no science, or maybe there is science to the contrary, through the rulemaking process, through the notice and comment process, an interested party can submit information demonstrating to the FDA that really the proposed standard is basically useless. Not only that, but after proposing the standard and adopting it, FDA must provide for periodic evaluation of any tobacco product standard to determine whether such standards should be changed to reflect new medical, scientific, or other technological data. Thus, the Tobacco Control Act acknowledges that developments in scientific research may lead to future changes in product standards. In brief, nobody will be blindsided by FDA's product standards for the newly deemed products. We all will have ample notice and opportunity to comment, and there will probably be deadlines for implementation of such standards once the proposed rule becomes a final rule and therefore effective. So, do not expect any FDA product standards on vaping products to become effective anytime soon. And I would venture to speculate, maybe, possibly for another few years. So a quick word on standards that FDA has issued for other regulated products. As you know, excuse me, FDA regulates many other products. For instance, foods, radiologic equipment, drugs, and so on. Apparently, FDA regulates every fourth consumer product on our market. These products have been regulated for many, many years, much longer than, of course, vaping products have been regulated for. And it took FDA many years to implement product standards for such other items. Just to give an example of products subject to performance standards: X-ray systems, laser products, sun lamps, ultrasonic therapy products, all must meet certain performance standards imposed by the FDA. But again, for vaping products, no matter how FDA regulates other products, we only need to look at Section 907 of the Tobacco Control Act, because therein resides FDA's authority to issue product standards for the newly deemed products. Now, in colloquial terms, standards can mean a lot of things. What we discussed so far is the definition of product standards under the Tobacco Control Act and the way FDA can create those standards. You may have heard us talk about other types of standards, ISO standards, as well as voluntary industry standards. Without entering into great detail, let me please emphasize that voluntary industry standards are a great idea, which we at Nicopure Labs fully support. However, whether the industry has its own standards or not, FDA will issue its standards only through Section 907. Therefore, as an industry, we may propose a product standard to the FDA, but really, FDA cannot just take an industry standard and agree with it. FDA must still engage in the notice and comment rulemaking imposed by the statute. And bear in mind that FDA has its own priorities about product standards. The head of the Center for Tobacco Products, Mr. Mitch Zeller, many times reminds us all that product standards are one of the most powerful tools that FDA has in changing the products. Also, please do not mistake future FDA product standards for ISO or International Standardization Organization standards, because those are not the same. The two are absolutely different, and FDA is not bound to consider or apply any ISO standards in developing its own standards. Also, at present, there are no ISO standards specific to vaping products. The procedure to develop ISO standards is very lengthy, and Nicopure Labs, together with others, have actually already embarked on that long journey. We at Nicopure Labs actively participate in the American National Standards Institute U.S. Technical Advisory Group. I know that's a mouthful, right? Called a TAG, or U.S. TAG Group, that has just started its work towards certain vaping products and testing standards. Those standards will hopefully one day become international ISO standards. However, please be aware that it might be a couple of years before we actually see any ISO standards developed for vaping products. You really have to follow the development of the TAG and ISO discussions, and of course there will be ample notice to the industry when such standards are issued. Nevertheless, we are committed to the development of standards and therefore have dedicated time, staff, and efforts to the ANSI TAG team. So this concludes our webinar on newly deemed product standards. As always, thank you for your attention, and we hope that you will find time to watch future regulatory updates from Nicopure Labs. Have a nice day.